Kong, King of Skull Island tells the story of Vincent Denham, Carl's son. Yeah, the original Kong guy, and Jack Driscoll, who are often a wild ride to Skull Island 2 decades after the events of the 2005 film. It's 1957 and Vincent needs some answers, so he tags along with Driscoll on a mission to find out the real deal about Kong's last stand and Carl's mysterious disappearance. Along the way, they bumped into ginormous creatures, ancient tribal secrets, and remnants of Kong's past. The story is almost a fine blend of humor, suspense, and "you've got to be kidding me" moments. So strap in because this tale is going to take you on a journey you won't forget. But before that, let's quickly recap the movie for a better perspective. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you, and let's begin. The Prelude. It's 1933, the Great Depression's hitting hard, and in New York City, there's this vaudeville actress, Ann Darrow. She's struggling like everyone else until this filmmaker, Carl Denham, scoops her up for a movie gig. She's a bit iffy at first, but then finds out her favorite playwright, Jack Driscoll, is penning the script. They're all set to shoot this film on the SS Venture, which is captained by Engelhorn. Carl's a bit sneaky, though, and tells everyone they're off to Singapore, but really he's aiming for someplace else. On board, Ann and Jack start falling for each other. Meanwhile, the crew's getting wind of some legal trouble for Carl, and the ship accidentally crashes into Skull Island due to some fog. The island's locals aren't exactly welcoming. They nab Ann and offer her up to Kong. Jack and the crew, including Carl, cameraman Herb, and a few others, try to rescue her but end up facing some serious dangers, like hostile natives and dino-like creatures. Ann, meanwhile, is charming Kong with her juggling and dancing. The rescue party is dwindling thanks to all the island's hazards, and Carl's now obsessed with filming Kong. Ann connects with Kong, realizing he's not just a brute. Jack eventually finds Ann, but not before Carl decides he wants to capture Kong. Fast forward, and they've got Kong in New York City putting on this Broadway show. Ann's not in it, though. She didn't want to be a part of this. Kong breaks free during the show looking for Ann and rampaging through the city. The army steps in, and Kong ends up climbing the Empire State Building with Ann. Navy biplanes come in, and it's a rough scene. Kong's fighting them off, but gets seriously wounded and falls off the building. In the end, Ann's there with Jack at the top of the building, and down on the street, everyone's gathered around Kong. Carl's there too, and he drops this line: "It wasn't the airplanes, it was beauty killed the beast." Pretty tragic, right? Kong just didn't fit in our world, and now let's get the wild ride started. Back to square one. March 16th. 1957, New York City. The story begins at a museum where an elderly man visits his wife and young son. Like most fathers, he tries to be cool and awesome to his kids and blurts out some really flawed tidbits about how dinosaurs lived 1,000,000 years ago and coexisted with cavemen. Vincent Denham overhears the conversation. Who is he? Well, he's Carl Denham's son, the failing filmmaker who inadvertently brought his crew to Skull Island back in 1933. The elderly man approaches Vincent, addressing him as kid, but he goes on to ask if he preferred Mr. Denham. So who's this guy? Well, it's Jack Driscoll, who was played by Adrian Brody, the man who once fought the Predators too. So yeah, Mr. Driscoll has quite the experience with giant monsters. They hadn't met each other for a very long time, but this was not just two old acquaintances catching up for a stroll down memory lane at a museum. Vincent had asked Driscoll to come see him. Driscoll asks the reason, and Denham tells him it was about his father and King Kong. You see, Vincent had become a paleontologist and always had a hard time believing that King existed in the first place. His reasoning was that as a scientist, he needed hard evidence, just as living creatures needed food and air. He had come across many pictures of Kong from 1933, but most of them simply showed a black mass, nothing too discernible or concrete to prove that Kong was actually brought to the heart of America from a long-forgotten place called Skull Island. But the Kong-sized bone of contention still stuck in his throat was the whereabouts of Kong's body after he fell off the Empire State Building. Driscoll tells him that some folks from the government came and took the body away, and no one knew where exactly it went. Additionally, Carl Denham disappeared a month after these incidents, leaving his wife and son in a hellhole of debt and lawsuits. Given the circumstances, our man Vincent wanted to get to the bottom of the case, and to get to the bottom, you gotta start where it all started: Skull Island. Like a father and son, Denham planned an expedition into the sea, but instead of Rangoon, Vincent Denham's destination was Skull Island. June 28, 1957. Vincent wanted Jack to tag along. The old man's expertise as someone who had previously been to Skull Island would have come in handy. Additionally, it was one of Driscoll's ships that they were taking, so yeah, that's what they do. After spending a month at sea, they were finally getting close to their destination. However, things were far from roses and lilies. The waters were pretty shallow and the ship suddenly became grounded. The worst part? Well, they sprung a plate or two, maybe even bent the drive shaft or damaged the prop. There was no way of telling how much damage the ship had sustained without going underwater for a closer look. But no matter the extent of the damage, they were stuck there for at least a couple of weeks until the spring tide raised the water levels. So, the ship's captain decided to drop the anchor until all the problems were fixed, and it was time to go home. Vincent did not wish to wait, so Driscoll asked a few of his men to row him over to the shore and sent a man named Raffaello as a translator in case they come across the violent locals of Skull Island. You see, unlike the Monster vs. Iwi people, these Skull Islanders were all about killing and offering you as a human sacrifice to Kong, or at least that's what they did back in the 30s. And if the years have turned them tamer, we'll get to see. So our man Vincent Denham got into a small boat with Driscoll's men and they headed for the shoreline. But of course, this was Skull Island and big monsters are never too far away. A giant octopus attacked them, overturning the boat. It killed most of the men and Vincent was taken away by someone. Jack Driscoll had stayed on his ship but could not just let Vincent face fate's worse than death. Naturally, he decided to come to the shore to look for Vincent. He was all alone. It was actually a good thing because several men would look like appetizing morsels, but one single man could sneak through unnoticed. But it seemed he had forgotten just how terrible the island was and just how huge everything was, including the bugs. The next panel takes us to Vincent Denham, but mysteriously appeared inside one of the tribal huts. He hallucinated about his father and Kong before snapping back into reality to meet a tribal woman who only went by storyteller. Vincent had heard his father's voice and asked the woman if she knew where he was. The storyteller, of course, knew his father, but didn't divulge any more information, telling Vincent that it was a story for another time. A day had passed since the events at the sea, and Driscoll was using a map of Skull Island to reach the tribal village, assuming that they must have found Vincent. On the other hand, another local named Kara was giving cryptic threats to Vincent. A story solution. Remember how I told you that Vincent heard his father's voice? Well, it was actually an Archaeopteryx from Skull Island that had somehow learned to mimic the voice of Carl Denham, so it was doing what parrots in the real world would do. Vincent's fever had receded, but he would still need quite a few days to return to his former healthy self. Vincent kept asking questions about his father and how exactly the Archaeopteryx, who was called OG by Kara and the storyteller, learned to mimic Carl Denham's voice. The living fossil might have heard Carl's voice somewhere, but the storyteller was not willing to divulge any information, simply telling Vincent that he would know about his father when the time was right. Kara and the storyteller takes Vincent to a temple built in the image of Kong. Of course, he is shocked to see it at first, but tries to snap back to his senses. But Vincent would not let go of the subject of his father, and the storyteller finally decided to help Vincent. But how? Well, she was a storyteller, and that's exactly what she was going to do. She was going to tell Vincent a story. Driscoll, on the other hand, was still looking for Vincent while battling dinosaurs and all that, but we'll come to that later. The storyteller takes Vincent back in time, when Skull Island was experiencing one of its most turbulent times as far as the polity was concerned. Back then, a giant wall separated their city from their old city and the giant monsters that lived there. The wall was built numerous years ago so that the monsters and the kaiju could not hurt the people anymore, but there was more to it. The two most important tribes on the island were the Tagu and the Atu. The current ruler belonged to the Tagu tribe, while a man named Bar Atu from the Atu tribe sought to usurp the throne after the king's death. Amidst this, the princess Ishara of the Skull Islanders and her Atu lover Kublai were worried about what was to come. You see, Bar Atu was someone who could easily sway people using the fear of gods. He had told his followers that the fury of heaven would strike the island in the form of a storm, and that's what happened. The princess believed it was nothing but just another storm. The wall itself meant many things to the locals. Some, like Kublai, believed that people depended too much upon the wall, becoming slaves to it. On the other hand, the princess believed that the wall was indispensable for protection, but due to the violent storm, lightning struck the wooden door, burning a hole into it, which allowed kaiju called Death Runners to walk through it and enter the city. As several Death Runners attacked Ishara, some of the tribe's warriors, but Kublai could see that the fight could swing in any direction without even a moment's notice. So he asked Princess Ishara to climb up the trees and flee to the storyteller. Yes, the same one. Our man Vincent was a bit confused by now. He was wondering why this story was necessary for him to learn about his father. Kara chastises him for interrupting and disrespecting the storyteller, but she stops Kara. The storyteller reassures Vincent that his story has everything to do with his father as well as the Kong he called king. So anyway, Princess Ishara reaches the storyteller. Kublai was safe, which relieved Ishara. The storyteller shows Ishara Ishara the Old City, the place where Bar-Atu claimed that the Tagu angered the gods with their arrogance when they built the city. Bar-Atu claimed that it was why the gods sent beasts to punish humans, but Bar-Atu had more words to say than fish in the ocean. He did not believe in the gods he spoke of. In fact, he'd only used the fear of them to control his followers. The storyteller asks Ishara not to pay any heed to his stories, saying they are just a means for him to serve his own ends. So, Ishara asks how it was that people in the old city managed to keep the beasts at bay. The storyteller's response was a bit surprising, if not shocking. She tells her that their primary weapon was knowledge. They used knowledge to kill the beasts in the old days. They had a stronghold in the center of the island where they used special herbs, weapons, and a series of tunnels, but they also had the giants, the Kongs, who worked with humans back in the day. But Ishara found it to be an old wives' tale. Her logic was that if they could do all these things, then what was the need to build a wall? A fair question, I would say. The storyteller explained that the Tagu searched for self-control while the Atu searched for ultimate control. This conflict led to a war between the two peoples, which ultimately led to the construction of the wall that separated the old city from the new one. Ishara wondered if the old city still existed. Well, not entirely, but in parts. Storehouses were built strong, and the seeds and herbs that the old city people used may still be there, waiting for a healer to repair the great rift in the hearts of the people. But Kara interrupted the story once again. She hated Vincent, for humans from the outside world had brought chaos, death, and destruction to her people. The storyteller reminded her that she should not judge him on the basis of the actions of others like him. In fact, when she started speaking in her local tongue, the storyteller reminded her that she should speak only in English in front of Vincent so that they could trust each other. But we learned from the conversation between the two ladies that Kara had made an oath to the storyteller and that she wanted to serve as the savior for people and the island. That's where the second one ends. Kong Killer Gao. Back in the new city, Princess Ishara goes to meet her ailing father, who tells her that Bar-Atu was calling for a feast to celebrate the victory against the Death Runners. He asks her to go in his stead to the feast as Bar-Atu's influence is ever growing amongst the people. Later that night at the feast, Bar-Atu was addressing the people. He spoke of Gao, an unholy monster according to Bar-Atu, and it was the reluctance of people of Skull Island to offer human sacrifice to Gao that he sent the storm, the lightning, and the Death Runners, who claimed the lives of 6 islanders. But Bar-Atu saw this as Gao's benevolence. How? Well, Gao took 6 lives, but he also gave them several death runners and slashers to feast upon. He asks his people to just think about how much more benevolence Gao would show if they willingly offered the sacrifices. But what exactly was Bar-Atu's game here if he did not believe in the god he was talking about? Well, he just wanted to kill the Tagu people without coming off as the bad guys. So the real plan was to sacrifice the Tagu people until only the Atu remained. By now, Ishara and Kublai had reached the place. They were shocked to see the influence Bar-Atu had on the people and how half of them now sided with him. Kublai suggested going against Bar-Atu in full force and killing him and his armed followers, but Ishara hushes him, for that was no place to discuss their plans of action. The following morning, Kublai and Ishara leave for the old city to find the seeds that could control the beasts of the jungles, which was the only way to stop Bar-Atu and convince the people that no sacrifices were needed. By midday, they had reached a small outpost in the old city, but they had discovered much more. The couple comes across a Kong family of 3, the parents and a younger Kong. Bar-Atu had told everyone that the Kongs had gone extinct, which was clearly a lie. But these massive gorillas were afraid of something, and Kublai and Ishara knew that if something could scare the Kongs, they had to remain absolutely silent and still. Within no time, the monster was revealed. It was Gao, a giant dinosaur red in color, adorned with innumerable horns and razor-sharp teeth. The monster killed the parents in a long and deadly fight, which was later joined by the Death Runners, but fortunately, the young Kong had managed to escape. Worried about the young Kong and their own safety, Ishara and Kublai decided to move silently towards the citadel where they come across a ship. It was people from the outside world, presumably soldiers from one of the European colonizers. Their ship had been damaged and it was sinking into the lagoon. Ishara tells Kublai that they should help them. Grave mistake, woman, grave mistake. By now, Kara had interrupted once again, claiming that he should not know their secrets. She believed that he would simply go back home with his stories and bring more like him to steal and kill in the name of study, but the storyteller tells her that it was important for him to know the whole story. In fact, it was important that even Kara knew the whole story. Reunion. Ishara and Kublai could not really communicate with the white men, but they wanted to help them, so they drew a map of their village, which was assigned for the guests to follow. But it wasn't before long that they came face to face with the monsters that dwelled in Skull Island. They killed an attacking dinosaur, and it was decided that it was safer to take the ship along with them to the village. Soon, the party reached the village where King Ontagu welcomed the strangers, and strangers started living in the village until their ship was fixed. Many, including the king, saw their arrival as a good sign because they brought great power with them, guns. But not all were happy. Vincent was not sure how any of this was going to help him know about his father, but the sea's waves affect one another, much like one's action affect another. Although Vincent did not wish to know how Baratu's shadow hung heavy over the king and how Princess Ishara was forbidden from seeing her own father. The story was going to tell them how the actions of their ancestors wrought their own destruction and made Kong a slave. For several weeks, the men from the sea worked on our ship, but progress was slow enough to turn hope into doubt. A man named Charlie and Ishara became friends and they learned one another's language. But things were not looking good. Baratu had been speaking to the strangers about their weapon, and this night was the night of the full moon. Kublai believed that a dark shadow loomed over them because Baratu was plotting something evil. That night, Baratu claimed that Ontagu should be the one to tame the Kong that Kublai and Ishara had seen in the jungles. His logic was that for many years the Tagu claimed that they knew how to control the beasts beyond the wall. So it should be a Tagu to show the way once again, and they should use the Kong to defeat the Gao. Kublai volunteered to do the task since he had the blood of both Atu and Tagu running in his veins. The strangers from beyond offered to help in the hunt. Many days passed, and finally, one day, the men returned with a captured Kong. The islanders taunted him, held him prisoner for many months, and beat him every day until the mighty Kong's will was broken. But Princess Ishara was against this, since it was not the way of the Tagu people. But Kublai favored Baratu's ways, and in doing so, he was becoming more like his adversary. So in reality, it was Kublai who turned the last remaining Kong into a murderous beast. You see, Kong saw his parents getting killed by Gao, and the islanders, the only creatures in his image, were torturing him. Only Ishara spared the creature any mercy, secretly feeding it and tending to its wounds. Baratu continued to push his power, decreeing that another sacrifice would show that God Gao approved of his teachings, and he chose one of the Tagu women as the one to be sacrificed. She was dressed in the finest of clothes and presented to Gao as a lamb to be slaughtered. The Gao arrived and wreaked havoc on the people. When Gao arrived, they poured oil on him and lit it up. But seeing Gao, Kong freed himself and went after the monster. In the aftermath, Ontagu died and Kublai became king, taking Ishara as his bride and queen. But what of Kong? How did he find his revenge? Baratu, Kublai, and Captain Magwitch traveled to the old city, leaving Ishara with the storyteller and her friend Charlie. But the storyteller interrupts her story to make Vincent meet someone. No, not his father. It was Driscoll, who had been captured by the natives. But it was, in fact, a rescue and not a capture. Next, the two men were taken by the storyteller to meet someone special. Yes, Carl Denham. And it was finally time to hear the story of how Kong became the King of Skull Island. Kong, King of Skull Island. Hey, the story from the past is not yet over. Kong's will is no longer broken. He was driven by revenge, but Gao eluded him, and being the last of his kind, his loneliness soon consumed the mighty Kong. He returned to the only place he knew was his sanctuary, but reaching there was another deal altogether. You see, by now, his weariness had replaced his rage, but Kong knew this place as a place of solitude, somewhere he could rest and gather the strength required to exact his revenge. Vincent asked his father if he ever saw Gao, but all of this happened before 1933. It was now that he finally confronted his father for abandoning him and his mother, but Carl tells him that he did his family more of a favor by staying away. On hearing this, Vincent accused his father of taking the coward's way out, but the storyteller interrupted and asked Vincent not to be so hasty with his judgments. It was finally time for the last leg of Kong's story. They took Vincent to the temple, the place where Kong once came. However, Vincent was shocked to see Kong's skeleton. He was confused about how it got there, but the storyteller still did not answer the questions about Kong, so she continued. Kong stayed at this place for several days when he was trying to regain his strength. He ate what he could to raise his strength, and before long, he was strong enough to make the first steps back outside, but Gao was waiting for Kong, who was the only challenger Gao ever faced. Still weak, Kong could only watch, bidding his time for revenge. The fates of different people were often entwined with each other. Baratu and Kublai led a campaign along with Magwitch deeper into the island, but Magwitch and his men were after treasure or anything valuable they could find. But Ishara and Charlie were also going into the jungle looking for herbs that would help them keep the monsters away. They reached the ruins of the old city. She had found the herbs, but Kublai, Magwitch, and the others also reached the place looking for gold. You see, King Kublai had offered Magwitch gold in exchange for killing Gao. Ishara implored her king to see reason. They had found a herb and there was no need for weapons or any bloodshed. However, more stakeholders reached the spot. Gao arrived and killed the captain, and it wasn't long before Kong arrived for his final fight with a Gao. Kong's desire for revenge was sated. Barat-2 God was dead, and everyone learned that Kong was now the real king of Skull Island, the beast who killed a god. When they came back, Barat-2 swayed the natives against Kublai and killed him. He resumed the sacrifices, and that's what happened to Anne when they arrived back in 1933. As the story drew to a close, Carl's heartbeat began to drop and he soon passed away. Ishara had taken refuge with the storyteller and was saved because of Kong, who later killed King Barat-2. In fact, the storyteller revealed that she, in fact, was Ishara. Kara was made the queen of her people, and Vincent and Driscoll left for home. Hang around with us for more content on Kong and the Monsterverse. We have such sights to show you. As always, if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.